The dead don't talk. The dead don't complain. The doctors had broken the law. Thing about it, it's too late for them.
Obviously, that's an unbelievably provocative statement.
And so that's why I'm also very careful about what I say. If I say it, I'm going to give you a receipt attached to it. They had an audio recording.
There are euthanasia acts and assisted suicide acts across the West. Germany, Belgium, Spain, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Austria, Portugal, Australia, New Zealand, the United States. None in Asia, although there's talk of it in Japan. So this seems to be basically a Western problem.
It is no longer about empathy and compassion for grandma who has Alzheimer's. We're expanding this into eugenics. Let's make it abundantly clear. Like, very, very fucking clear.
In simple terms, it's over-indexed compassion, or what Gad Saad might call suicidal empathy.
1 in 20 Canadians. We are removing hope from a society. It's a subliminal message. The doctors in her province said she did not qualify. She is a Canadian doctor with one of the highest kill counts. She's a problem in society.
Before you hear from the tornado that is Kelsi Sheren, I ask if you want to support this show. Remember, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, I can have more difficult conversations like that of quote-unquote assisted dying and euthanasia that the mainstream media won't touch and that you want to hear about. But without further ado, here she is, Kelsi Sheren. Kelsi Sheren, welcome to the show. A great pleasure to have the opportunity to sit down with you. You've been making storms online, of course, as well as being a Canadian war veteran. You are an author of the book, Brass and Unity, One Woman's Journey Through the Hell of Afghanistan and Back, and of the popular The Kelsi Sheren Perspective podcast. What I wanted to discuss with you today is assisted dying, as it's euphemistically, in my opinion, called. I think it might be more accurate to call it assisted suicide, and though perhaps I'm exposing my bias as we begin, and this is obviously different from euthanasia, but you are now the most outspoken, or certainly one of the most outspoken activists against it, particularly when it comes to what's going on in Canada with the MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying program. So look, I want to talk about what's going on in Britain and the context of the world. Mm-hmm. And perhaps we can even get into what is the philosophy that's underpinning this movement towards state-assisted suicide. But I just wanted to ask you, how do you get from Afghan war vet to activist in this domain?
I think it's a great question. Thank you for having me. The hard part about the things I discuss is that they're hard and they're uncomfortable and they make people think in a way that maybe they never thought they would have to think. And I think it puts forward a lot of existential questions, as well as where do we draw the lines with empathy and compassion? And part of the problem with this pro-death cult movement, and I mean that in the most extreme way, it is a death cult movement, is that it removes what it means for us to care about one another. It is no longer about empathy and compassion for grandma who has Alzheimer's. We're expanding this into the globe in a way where it is eugenics. That word is aggressive and it seems extreme. And to be very clear, I'm not a right-wing extremist. I've come from Canada, where I very much was a liberal for a very, very long time, very center-left, even if you would. Now I'm definitely center-right, but I am definitely not a right-wing extremist by any means. I'm a person who has read too much, who knows too much, who have too many friends who have died by suicide or died overseas. And then I'm a person who was injured in Afghanistan. And what kind of came with that for me was a decade of suicidality, a decade of overprescribed pharmaceutical intervention, and a lack of community, and a lack of purpose, and isolation. And due to a company I started based on some suggestions from my psychiatrist, which was art therapy, which is what Brass and Unity became, I was able to realize that you are not the labels you're given. You are not the things that happen to you. You can literally become better because of the things that happen to you. And in 2020, 2021, there was rumblings in Canada with Veterans Affairs Canada And you were starting to hear things about suicide. And for most people who don't know what MAID is, it's medical assistance in dying, but it came into legalization in 2016. So in 2016, we did not create a new law. We just amended the criminal code to allow for doctors to assist in death. Now, that's important to understand the difference because we didn't create a law. It was an amendment to a law. And that's the dangers of law, is they're amendable. They're not solid foundational. So just for a moment, when Kim Leadbeater says things like, this will never be abused, we will never go further the terminally ill, I call bullshit.
Yeah, so Kim Leadbeater is the British Labour MP,
right,
who carrying through the terminally ill adults bill.
Right. It starts as adults, right? So how it happened was I had the brand Brass and Unity since 2016. I had been in the public, early, right before 2020, I would say 17, 18, 19. My brand was in Forbes and Elle and on every celebrity possible. And I was known as the bullet girl, the girl that took jewelry and we made it out of bullets and we donated the money. And I loved that. And that was my sense of purpose. But I made the mistake of wrapping my identity around a brand because I was not healed enough yet from the traumas. So that was almost masking. In 2019, 2020, the suicidality kicked up again for me. And I was, like everyone else during COVID, I said, why don't we start a podcast? So I started a podcast and I had a former Army Ranger come on and suggest ayahuasca for me. And that's actually the turning point in my life. And from 2020 to 2025 now, I'd always been in suicide prevention. The point of the brand was to prevent suicide, to make others realize that nobody can ever fill the void that you will leave, regardless of what you think. You are a burden, you're too difficult, you're hard to be around. I've been called those titles most of my life. So when you're told those on repeat, you start to believe them. Just like anything else with the trans movement, you tell a child long enough they're a cat, they'll believe they're a cat. The same way you tell somebody that they're a burden, they will feel as if they are a burden. 2021 kicks around, and because of the platform I had built for myself, whether it's from the fashion industry, the civilian side of things, or the military side of things, which was me speaking out for veterans in a lot of different domains, whether that was bringing attention to psychedelic-assisted therapies through the Special Access Program in Canada, whether that was doing one of the first clinical trials for a macrodose of psilocybin for Apex Labs, whether that was just genuinely showing veterans that you don't have to be the label. A veteran reached out to me due to the podcast, and at this point, I had done Jocko and Lex Friedman, and I had told my story publicly. And I am a female with a rare job, or what I did have was a rare job in service. And so it made me stand out in the sea of military members. And they said, look, Kelsi, I don't know what to do with this information, but we have a veteran who is a special operator in Canada who was just offered MAID when he called Veterans Affairs Canada to ask for help. This veteran had served a long time. He had a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis and a traumatic brain injury. They had an audio recording. And this is wild because they will always call you a liar if you can't prove it, right? And so that's why I'm also very careful about what I say. If I say it, I'm going to give you a receipt attached to it because they love the media and people who are in this pro-death cult love to come at me and say, you're not a doctor, you're not a scientist, you're not a journalist. And I would argue podcasters are more journalistic now than any other journalist out there that exists other than the non-traditional, incredible Glenn Greenwald, Michael Schellenberger, and Substack individuals. But regardless, they gave me access to this guy and they gave me access to the audio recording. And it was incredibly troubling and shook me to my core because what I realized was if Veterans Affairs Canada was offering it to one, they were offering it to more. So now it just became a fact-finding mission. And there was a part of me, and I try to keep religion out of all of these discussions because it can very quickly go into a pro-life conversation, and I don't want to have that conversation. It is not the same. But there was a point with me where I was raised Catholic, and during the war, I had lost all of that faith. When I found psychedelics and I started sitting with medicine, it very quickly brought me back to the greater good of God. And what does that mean to be in the positions we're put in? And I don't believe in coincidence. I believe that you are right where you were supposed to be when you are in it. And so for me, it became a real reality that I'm now being put in a position to discuss a topic that, regardless of how heavy, how uncomfortable, every time I try to walk away from it, it keeps pulling me back into it. And I keep being told I just need to say it. There are people that have been doing this for 25 years, talking about euthanasia and what they were fearful of would come down the pipe, what we were seeing in hospitals, whether it was the double blind, which is, where a doctor increases the drugs and they say to the family members, if I increase the drugs, the heart rate will go down, they will most likely pass. That seems like more compassion and empathy, you would think. But once we found out about this, we realized there was something worse going on. And in 2021, that's when Track 2 came into place. So to give your listeners an idea, if they're unsure of what this is, in 2016, Track 1 came into place, which was for foreseeable death, meaning you were going to die in a very short period of time. You were terminally ill. This was Alzheimer's, dementia, terminally ill cancer diagnoses, really severe, significant conditions that were empathetic to end the life of that individual for suffering purposes. And just like everyone was fearful of, they amended the law. And this is what Kim says will never happen, which I call hard bullshit on. Because like Liz Carr, who's in Your Great Country, Liz Carr did a documentary on the BBC called Better Off Dead. She's a disabled activist. She's also an actress. She's one of the funniest dark humor people I've ever met. She goes, Kelsi, I would encourage you to look at it this way. Once the law is in place, you do not get to decide what walks through. And she was so right. So 2021...
slippery slope, as what I call it.
We call it a slippery slope, but Canada was off a cliff. We are the bad actors of the world. People say, well, that's very anti-Canadian of you. It's not anti-Canadian. To be anti-Canadian would mean to say that I hate my country. I just don't recognize my country. This is not where I grew up. This is not what I fought for. Canada's lost its identity and, frankly, its goddamn mind. And so in 2021, we put in Track 2. Track 2 is for non-foreseeable death. Non-foreseeable death can mean what we now know to say a widespread gamut. Whereas people at the including things like and so this is where the dying with dignity cult's going to come after you. Are you ready? Because we can prove it all. What they will do is say that you can't kill anybody for depression or fibromyalgia or diabetes or hearing loss. But that can be your comorbidity. It cannot be your main reasoning, okay? So in 2021, Track 2 comes in, non-foreseeable death. Okay, I'm going to give you a great example. In Alberta last year, WV and MV, can't say their names, there's court cases, obviously. I know these people personally. I know this father very well. I know the daughter very well. Daughter goes, 27 years old, autistic. Walks into a hospital and decides she wants to apply for MAID. She doesn't qualify for MAID. She's not sick. She's not terminally ill. She has no irremediable, and these are the words, irremediable condition or grievous condition. She's a 27-year-old who's autistic, high functioning, and fixates. Okay? She got doctors to approve her for MAID. She's not ill, Winston. She's not sick in any way, shape, or form other than the biggest mistake is she fixated and she was able to find online, which are very, very searchable, websites that teach you how to work a system, a very broken system, a symptom of a sick society. She got herself qualified. And in Canada, and just like in the UK, they've now stated, we don't believe the family members should be told. So they found out, and the father has now spent hundreds of thousands of dollars suing the Canadian government to keep his daughter alive. And to this day, she is still alive, but she is still in the system. The part that Dying with Dignity hates the most, and they hate when we talk, and Ellen Wiebe and these people that I speak about and go after.
A Canadian activist.
No, she is a Canadian doctor with one of the highest kill counts. Can I swear on this show? She's a fucking problem in society. There's criminal investigations into her right now.
Would she accept, she obviously wouldn't accept kill count as a term. She would have said, how would she, what terminology would she
Well, she says it in the National Post. It's the most beautiful, wonderful work she's ever done. As she stated in the National Post, up to 16 to 2022, her The people she helped end their lives from compassion and empathy is over 400 alone. She stopped.
She admits at 400.
In the National Post, public information, all searchable. I'll give you the links after. So again, let me make this clear. Anything I say here, I'm going to give you a massive email with every link to it.
Well, I think if you can make the cases convincingly here for listeners. So she herself has come out and said she is
absolutely
proud of assisting 400.
Greatest work she's ever done. By the way, she does abortions as well, but this is the greatest work she's ever done. She stated it on the National Post and the New York Times on Better Off Dead. There's a great part of the interview I suggest people go and watch. You will see the psychopathic tendencies that come out in this woman. It's incredibly concerning. But my point in saying here is what happens is you have doctors, just because we are humans. We are humans. We have ideological flaws. And there are a subset of individuals, Dr. Christopher Lyon at York University here, who is a Canadian who wrote a paper recently called Healthcare Serial Killers, illustrates this beautifully. You can move from track 2, which is like a long-term 90-day waiting period, right? To track 1, which is almost immediate death, by saying this specific sentence. I am no longer eating or drinking. Now your death becomes foreseeable. Do you see how easy that is? Because we have no safeguards.
So, look, I want to come back to your statement about eugenics, because obviously that's an unbelievably provocative statement, or I'm certainly irked by it. I think when you use the term death cult movement,
yes,
it's sort of just that I think you've basically made the case for that. Yes. It's some sort of, is it twisted compassion?
Yes, there's worse.
But I guess death cult movement sort of implies they seek death.
Yes, absolutely.
They're happy about death, rather than it being excessive compassion.
It's a death cult movement, and let me explain why. Because it doesn't just end with track 2. In 2024, they were supposed to include people with mental illness only and mature minors. It keeps expanding. And by expanding, I mean, yes, it got tabled, but it kicks into gear in 2027. Right.
So I just want to make another case, because actually in Britain, polling suggests that 75% of Brits support assisted dying, to be fair to them, for incurable diseases causing intolerable suffering. So most people, when they see it, 3 in 4, so it's in this country support this, they will think, well, they probably think, if I was in a situation where I know I'm going to die and I'm just like in unbelievable agony, or someone I love is in unbelievable agony, it's compassionate to help them on their way in that sense, which is it's quite a leap from their point of view to get to eugenics and death cult movement. Okay. Now, is that because you think that itself is death culty and eugenical or eugenics, or do you think that there's another step is there another step that you're making from what most people understand assisted dying to be?
No. So let me lay it out a little more clear and maybe abrupt. So maybe what I find about the UK is it's very similar to Canada. And so because I'm Canadian, people hate the way I talk, so I'm quite American in it. But let's make it abundantly clear, like very, very fucking clear. When you start telling people in a society that they no longer have value as they suffer, who the fuck ever told you that you were never going to suffer in this life? Who made that promise to you? Nobody. Why do you think it's okay for a healthcare care being the word, system, to then turn around and tell you that you should die because you are now a burden on others or you are suffering? What happened to palliative care? What happened to hospice? What happened to the family community? Palliative care is a 50-year science.
What happened to the Hippocratic Oath?
What happened to, we don't have that anymore, my God. So let's take it one step further. Pro-death cult also looks like this. So now we've gone from grandma terminally ill, right? Then we've gone from terminally ill to people who are struggling, right? Now we've gone to people who are mentally ill.
Well, to be precise, the bill as it currently stands, and I know I've mentioned slippery slope, but as it stands, over 18, this is the British, well, England and Wales, I should say.
Yes.
Over 18 and you have to be not terminally, it's not mentally well. So you must have good mental capacity. I've forgotten the exact terminology, the legal terminology they use. And the latest proposed amendments, it's gone through 2 passings in the House of Commons, is that it would have to also go through there's kind of no longer a High Court judge, but rather a sort of panel, which will include either a retired High Court judge or a King's Counsel, a specialist in a couple of specialists along the way. So this is the kind of change. So it's not at the moment that from the people who support it, they think that that's proper safeguarding,
right?
Which is not exactly what you've described. But your proposition is that this is the beginning and it's a slippery slope.
But this is how it started for us,
right?
And so the reason this is eugenics, and the reason people a lot smarter than me agree with me, is because we have forgotten what history has taught us. Especially in this country. In the UK, where we're sitting in London, you guys have forgot what has happened here in your nation and in the surrounding countries around you. Eugenics didn't start as eugenics. Eugenics started as care and compassion. We're going to take your children who are a little disabled, who struggle. We're going to put them in a facility and we're going to educate them. We're going to give them literacy and we're going to care for them. And then their parents got letters 6 months later. Right. Look at Hadamere Castle. Right? That was a place for children with who were disabled, who had injuries, who were mentally unwell, who were terrible eaters.
That's here?
It was in Germany. Okay? That's how it started. The government looked after them. It was a place of care and compassion. And then it became the single largest place for teaching others how to most effectively and efficiently kill them. It was such a place where even Jews weren't allowed to be killed there. Right? This was your World War I veterans who were shell-shocked. This was your terrible eaters. This was your children who were struggling with any mental capacity, ailments, issues, physically or otherwise. And then this became a sterilization location as well. So when you look at this continued push in Canada, people can say, but that's not happening in the UK. It's not happening in the UK. It wasn't happening for us either. But that's what happens, and these are pro-death, because this is the definable term for me, pro-death. If you wake up every morning and you spend every waking minute of your day fundraising and promoting death, you by definition are pro-death, no? Right? So you go on vacations with the money that you've raised, that you've been paid for by this organization because you work for them. So you are taking vacations with your family who you love because you've promoted so much just slow drip ideology that people should have the right to die. And that's your paycheck. That's what you do. All you do is think about how do we get more people to donate money to our organization to help us promote more death. That is pro-death. So let's take it a step further. Canada didn't start like this. No. We had the same thing. We were promised safeguards. We were promised multiple doctors to look at every single case. Do you know what happens with that? Let's give you some examples.
Tell me.
Okay, this is how this goes wrong. Yes, we were supposed to have multiple doctors and, we had courts and we had all of the lovely safeguards we were all promised. Cool. Ellen Wiebe has multiple times approved people over one Zoom session. So we actually got a court case put in. It was in the 11th hour before she killed somebody who did not qualify just a couple months ago. Okay. Her common law partner reached out to a friend of mine, Alicia Duncan, who's also an activist, whose mother was killed with MAID wrongfully. Was also the first criminal investigation brought in. And what had happened is this lady was suffering from bipolar 2, cycling 2, and she had akathisia. If people don't know what that is, Jordan went through that. He speaks about it quite publicly, going off of medication and the symptoms of what that looked like. It is excruciating. You don't sleep. You just spin out. Your whole body hurts. It is what most would consider irremediable. You can't live like that long term. Jordan spoke about it several times on Joe Rogan. You just want to die. It's so painful. She had the same thing. So what she did is she went online and found a bunch of other websites that would agree with her and found her way to Ellen Wiebe. And then she reached out to Ellen Wiebe, and Ellen Wiebe, with her partner, took a Zoom call without seeing medical records, without having her in person, without even asking more than 1 hour of Zoom calls. She approved her to die that week. That woman got on a plane and flew to British Columbia from another province because, let's just be clear, the doctors in her province said she did not qualify. She doctor shopped to death. And this individual was smart enough to look online and found a bunch of us and got to us. And my girlfriend, Alicia, knowing the system, got her to a lawyer. And that lawyer stayed up for 24 hours writing an injunction, took it to the court. And it was the first injunction placed within the 11th hour. She was supposed to be killed that Sunday. This was put in Sunday morning. And it barred Ellen Wiebe from killing her. What the UK is suggesting is that the family members do not need to know. So if that was the case in Canada, which, by the way, it totally is, they don't tell the family members. My girlfriend Alicia found out only days before her mother was going to be killed after she just had attempted suicide. They killed her that week anyway. So you cannot tell me there are safeguards because you know how you work around the safeguards? Alicia's mother was a psych nurse. She knew the system. This is not a empathetic and compassionate movement. This is how do we get rid of the liabilities, the burdens on society. And the reason this is a slippery slope and will be a cliff for you, mark my words, years from now, if this goes through, I will come back and I will say, I told you so. Not you, but this country. Because what will happen is what's happening. It opens the door to harsher conversations that are eugenic. The terminally ill, the mentally ill, which by definition, they should not have the capacity, which we do normally put them on a 72-hour psych hold if somebody says, I want to take my own life, right? That's the proper care and compassion somebody deserves when they are struggling. Not, hey, what about MAID? How about we kill you? Like the veteran who was offered it when he said, I'm struggling, I don't have help, I don't know what to do. And he said, why not MAID? And I quote, it would be better than blowing your brains out on the wall. We deserve more than saying to someone that they should die. And so what happens next in Canada in 2027 is mature minors. There is no age limit to that, my friend. All the doctor has to say is they are of the opinion they were mature enough to make the decision. We do not let you vote until you're 18, drink until you are 19, have a gun till you are 18 in this country of Canada, at least. But you're telling me that they are mature enough to make a permanent decision, often to a temporary problem.
Is there any other case in Canadian law where mature minor is used or referred to?
I mean, none that I'm aware of.
Standalone.
No, this is
by definition is like isn't it an oxymoron legally?
Absolutely. I mean, it does. For any sane human being, it feels that way. But I mean, not sanity feels like it's fleeting now. And so where this gets worse is now that we've had this conversation, it opens up the conversation for people like the College of Physicians in Quebec. In 2022, came out publicly suggesting that we should be teaching our doctors to consider infanticide. This is soft launching eugenics. This is not fear-mongering. This is not going, oh, it's a one-off. From 2018 to 2022, the MAID coroners and the Oversight Committee in Ontario found over 420 deaths that were non-compliant, which meant the doctors had broken the law. But the thing about it is it's too late for them. The dead don't talk. The dead don't complain. So let's take it a step further because the UK loves to say, just like Canada, but Kelsi, you don't have the right to tell me to die. Okay, cool. Why do we think it's okay for the government to be involved in the decisions about whether we should live or die? You have Bill Gates talking about death commissions on whether how much can this person cost the rest of society versus how much are they going to help society? How much care should they get? We are taking away what it means to be in a society that cares for one another. We are weaponizing the world's compassion and care. We no longer actually care whether you're alive and whether you're a good person. We only care whether you cost us money and whether you are a burden on the healthcare system. You guys have the same problem with your healthcare system as we have the same problem in Canada with our healthcare system.
Yeah. So I want to come back to the slippery slope thing, which, frankly, you're speaking to the choir a little bit. But just on the point of healthcare, I want to understand the cost of this, because one thing that I resent, because I am against this, I particularly, aside from what I consider the moral ill of it, I also resent that I have, as a taxpayer, am paying for this. So I wanted to get a sense of the cost. Obviously, it's going to be different from country to country. But how much is it costing us, the taxpayer? Do you have an idea what it is in Canada, what it is in England?
We know a little bit of what we're saving, but we don't know what it's costing.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, I believe it was in 2020, was the 2021 report? 2021 or 2022 report, we looked at palliative care and how much we saved doing MAID deaths versus palliative care. And it was $86.9 million alone in 1 year.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So we're saving money by ending your life. It's not expensive to do it because these drugs, here's the thing people don't understand about the drugs. There's no specific set of drugs. The NIH lists the Canadian MAID kit, but what it doesn't explain is, again, in very public forums, Ellen Wiebe states, I use my own special cocktail. So the thing about that is, and it's very important to, because people are not addressing this, none of these drugs in any of these countries have been FDA approved for killing, yet they are all being used for such.
So in the case of capital punishment, I understand the case for capital punishment. I believe this is in the States. One of the arguments against it is it end up costing the state more to kill these criminals than to keep them alive because of the legal costs.
Yes.
So the mountains and mountains of legal costs that actually, if you want to talk about the burden on the taxpayer, it's actually better to keep them alive. Now, I'm sure people argue against that, but I've certainly heard that argument. Are there not legal, I mean, is there not, with each case, taking aside the process itself, when it comes to the legal process, is that not going to be a tax burden?
Of course it is. I mean, think of it this way. I mean, WV and MV, he spent over at least $200,000 already trying to keep his daughter alive. Alone, personally. But here's the thing. Most people that we know of,
but that's to keep her alive.
To fight to keep her alive.
But presumably, even if there isn't such a fight, there's some sort of legal fees on that process, or is that maybe an American thing?
No, that's not a Canadian thing. I mean, how it normally works, you go, you apply, you get qualified, and then you go and you walk in and then you die. Right?
There's very little.
There's no safeguards in Canada. This is why we are the bad actor. This is why the numbers are they are. This is why the newest projection of numbers for death count for 2024 have gone from 2023 of over 15,000 to 2024 over 16,500. We are on a trajectory like this, my friend, that if the UK is unwilling to see, we can't. Kim Leadbeater and Keir Starmer and your MPs all right now are going through hearings on this, right? They refuse. This is not my conjecture. This is not me making things up. I am in a MAID group, okay? I'm in a MAID group of lawyers and doctors and activists from all over the world. They will not hear evidence from Canada, specifically from Canada. Wonder why that is. Could it be that we've done this wrong? Could it be that we are in a beautiful example of what safeguards look like? Could it be that we have so many doctors abusing the privilege? If you read Dr. Christopher Lyon's paper on healthcare serial killers, you will very quickly see that this is how bad things happen. For example, say a nurse has just loves to harm people who are already close to end of their life. And they just start killing people, just overdosing here and there, and say that doctor who is above them catches it. They don't have to report it. The MAID process is a self-reporting system, right? So that doctor can get up and go somewhere else and do it there. My point is there are too many loopholes here, and we are not looking at how humans work from a human biology perspective. There is always going to be people in the world that would like to see harm come to others. The thing about doctors is they come from a place of power. So people will, I don't know if you've ever gone into a doctor and said this, well, I looked this up and this is what I thought. Have you ever heard the response, I went to medical school. You don't get to argue with me. You don't get to Google something on Wikipedia and then tell me. Well, the thing about the medical system, like anything else, that's why in the US, the third largest death is medical malpractice, is egos, arrogance, the human condition. Humans make mistakes. Humans become egotistical. Humans enjoy power. It's why you see some cops be bad actors. They overreact. They respond a certain way. They're in positions of power. Ellen Wiebe is the definition of a concern. It is I am relieving of the suffering. I am the only one that can bring peace to this person. The God complex kicks in. And when they get away with it long enough, they believe that they can just keep doing it. Because, again, in Canada, the rules are I just have to say I was of the opinion. We don't have to prove it. That's why no one has been charged with murder. This is why people get away with it. Because they also don't have to involve the family members. And now Kim is stating we don't and we shouldn't involve the family members.
So in Britain, the precedent in Britain for slippery slope, there's two, which is firstly the Divorce Act, and when that was first introduced, it was for compassionate reasons. It's for women who are stuck in terrible abusive relationships. We need to get them out, and after that, the rate of divorce skyrocketed to such a point that eventually the rate of marriage just ended up declining because people lost confidence in marriage altogether. And but perhaps more germane to this is that abortions were initially introduced for compassionate reasons. And I think at the moment we now have 250,000 abortions a year in Britain. It's no longer rare. That was the argument. It would be rare. So it seems to me that basically if you actually look for anything comparable, it is a slippery slope. There's not really. Are there even any examples of there not being a slippery slope?
Not the ones that I can find. And that's why people have such a hard time with the conversation with me. They're like, but it's fear-mongering. I said, not if you read.
So just zooming out a little bit to the world, this seems to be a sort of Western-wide thing. It didn't start in Canada, but there are euthanasia acts and assisted suicide acts across Europe and the West. The Netherlands since 2002, Belgium 2002, Switzerland 1942, Spain 2021, Luxembourg 2009, Portugal 2023, although I think there was some pushback there, Austria 2022, Germany 2020, in Canada, obviously we've discussed that, and in the United States, so it's not nationwide, but there is assisted suiciding in Oregon as of 1997, Washington 2009, Vermont 2013, California 2016, Colorado 2016, Hawaii, Maine and New Jersey 2019, New Mexico 2021, and even in Montana via a court ruling. So these aren't necessarily all democratic or progressive states, and as well in Australia and New Zealand. There's one country in South America, which is Colombia, none in Asia, although there's talk of it in Japan. So this seems to be basically a Western problem.
Right.
Do you think I'm fair in saying that? You agree with that?
Absolutely. It's predominantly white people using it.
But is there being white relevant, or is it to do with the culture?
I mean, they're both relevant, and I'll tell you why. Because I just had this conversation, and I think it's so important. When we look at euthanasia versus assisted suicide, let's be clear about what they are. Assisted suicide is this. Winston, you're going to drink this. You're going to suffer a little bit, even though they say you're not. It's going to burn your esophagus. It's going to suck. And we think it's going to take about this much time. But actually, we have cases of it taking upwards of like 137 hours. So you're going to drink that now, and you're going to die. That's assisted suicide. That's what the majority of people don't understand is very few people are doing this. Slippery slope is this. Hi, give me your arms. I'm going to hook you up with 2 IVs, and then I'm going to euthanize you. That is the slippery slope. People don't really want to kill themselves most of the time. Or
they
just
want to end the suffering.
Want to end the suffering. Or in Canada's case, they're homeless. They can't afford to live anymore. They've been told they're a burden on society. And so they believe it.
Wait, what?
You don't know about this?
No.
Oh, there's cases in Toronto where homeless people have applied and been approved.
On the grounds that they're homeless?
Yeah. And so
legally on the grounds that they're homeless?
Yes. So here's
the state approved saying yes because you're homeless.
And then do you know what happened? Is somebody heard about this and did a GoFundMe and got that man money, and then he rejected and decided to live. And this isn't just me. Danielle Smith, who of Alberta, just recently admitted that as well, because what you have to understand is it's 1 in 20 Canadians
1 in 20 Canadians what?
are death by euthanasia.
1 in 20 Canadian deaths are death by
Euthanasia. Put 20 people in a room, take one out. Do you see how small that is? Do you see how frequent that is? That means it will touch everyone. Everywhere. So when you look at California numbers, for example, the 800 or so, was that not in 2024, 2023, and you go, but California's population density, all in California, is Canada's entirety. How does that work? It's because they do assisted suicide and not euthanasia. Where in Canada, we euthanize you. We take the responsibility away from you, right? So a great example is the Luminous Veil study in Toronto on Bloor Street Bridge. That used to be one of the single-handedly most jumped from bridges in North America. People were just dying by suicide left, right, and center. And so they did a campaign to come up with how do we help people not die? So they built this called the Luminous Veil, so you can't jump from it anymore. And not only did suicide not only did it go down in that area, it went down in all of the areas surrounding it. Because when you dangle a carrot, the carrot becomes the goal, right? So when they think they have, a solution to the pain, you no longer think about how to build resiliency through the pain. And that's what happens here. The slippery slope goes, it's right here when you need it. So then you go, I guess I don't really need to do the treatment. And that's my pushback, right? So when we look at things like cancers, what's the point of research anymore? Why? Why research anymore? Why research into Alzheimer's anymore? Or cures, or dementia, for that matter? Why bother at all if we're just going to dangle suicide anyway? Do you see what I'm saying? We remove hope. We are removing what it means for people to get through hard things. Look at the Holocaust. How did survivors get through the concentration camps? Hope. The second you take hope away, everything else falls apart. We are removing hope from a society. We are saying it doesn't matter if you have pain or you're struggling, we'll just end it anyway. It's a subliminal message. It's the same way, and I've said this several times, and it bears repeating. We are slow dripping a message into our society. I'll give you an example. Simon's department store. It's a home goods store. It's not a medical place or a advocate location for healing of some point. No. They sell tables and Billabong sweaters.
This is in Canada?
Yes, in Quebec. They did an ad years ago advertising assisted suicide with their home goods. With a girl that could not get medical attention, so she chose to check out. Because she was going through an extreme cancer, she couldn't get in to the doctor she needed because the healthcare is so poor in that country that she decided to end her life. And they did this commercial advertising their home goods on a beach with the ocean, with the cliffs and the bubbles and loved ones around her, talking about how it would be this beautiful experience walking across the Rainbow Bridge. Well, let's talk about what that experience actually really is. It's death by drowning or death by waterboarding. And that's not me being facetious. That's looking at Dr. Joel Zivit's testimony, which I read on Jordan Peterson, and we confirmed this week with somebody else's autopsy in Canada. Right? This is not painless and compassionate, because if it was Canada, why do you use a paralytic? Why does grandma need to be paralyzed if it's so painless? It's because, have you ever seen a lethal injection patient go through actual lethal injection? There's a reason there's a curtain. Do you think it's relaxing as your lungs fill with fluid and go into a pulmonary edemic state and you drown on your own blood? No. Does it work every time? Absolutely not. Do we know that for sure? Absolutely. We have people right now that are not ready to talk to the media, but very broad strokes. So give you some opportunities to learn about the cases. Individual calls, qualifies for MAID, doctor comes to the home, patient's lying in the bed, family all surrounding watching. Which, by the way, now we have all made you accessories to murder. And also, we do not teach people how to handle death anymore in society. We do not teach people what it looks like to watch someone pass. This patient goes through the process. They all think he's dead. MAID doctor leaves. He's in the car. That patient, they all hug him. He wakes up.
I haven't understood why it's a white thing, though.
Because that's actually the statistic in what we're seeing. It's high 90s that white individuals are the ones utilizing the program. So let's talk about the culture of it, like you were saying. Okay. If you look traditionally at South Asian cultures.
As in within the West.
Within the
the
West.
people who are actually doing it's
white.
white.
But the words you hear are, I feel isolated, lonely, lack of community, and lack of purpose, and lack of support. If you look at nursing homes, tell me how many Asian people you see in nursing homes sitting there by themselves. My mom used to work in one. It was a lot of white people. Culturally, how many Japanese people do you see putting their loved ones or grandmothers living somewhere else other than with them? What about South Asians? How many Indians do you know where their grandparents go live somewhere else? How many Black people do you know? How many poor people do you know where their loved ones are not being looked after by their own family members? Seriously.
So there's a deep cultural issue within those of European heritage.
It feels that way, and that's kind of what the numbers are currently
showing. Okay, so why do you think that is? Where does that come from? Where does that stem from?
Personally, I feel like over time there has been an erosion of the family unit and the community and what it means to look after one another, because we have told and been told now for multiple decades that it should be me, 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 me. And you have seen this erode over the past decade, especially with the trans movement. It is about me. You need to cater to me. It's how I feel. And if you make me feel upset, I'm going to make all of you feel upset. We have no longer looked at the collective and go, how do we heal? And one of the things I do in my coaching practice is this. Do you need to be coached, or do you need me to listen? The majority of the time, people need someone to listen because they don't have anybody. They don't have the community. They don't have the purpose. What we used to do when you think about the plains in America when they were overrunning all of the Indians is you would be a part of a community. And if you were not a part of a community and you were left, it was most likely you were going to die. But even in Indigenous communities and Indian communities, when someone was sick, they didn't drop them off and say, bye-bye. They held them. They held them tightly and said, we've got you, and you can smack off all of the walls, but we've got you. We don't do that anymore.
Okay, so I think I'm pretty convinced by that case. As you speak, I also trying to think of other things it might be, and I'd love your opinion on this. Could it be something to do with the sort of post-industrialized state of the West? Industrialization drew people away from their villages into main cities. So we for many centuries, more than other parts of the world, are used to being more detached or deracinated from our homes. And I guess on top of that, now post-war globalization, we're used to traveling even further away from our homes. And another thing, I'd love your opinion on that. But another thing is, even though, let's say, trans ideology or woke ideology or some of these new faddish things that have popped up, even though they are sort of opposite to Christianity, they kind of go against everything that Christianity is about. I think it would be fair to say that you could probably say they have their foundation. You could probably draw a link from them to Christianity. And in simple terms, I've kind of said this already, but it's over-indexed compassion, or what Gad Saad might call suicidal empathy.
Yeah.
And that compassion comes from Christianity. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but do you think that I'm right or wrong to think this?
I think you're touching on it. I think it's really complex. So to say it's someone's fully right or fully wrong, I think is to take a hard stance. I think it's more nuanced than that. But I would agree, yes. I think the ideals of compassion and empathy have always been rooted in, I think, almost any religion, really, except for, there's a few. But I think Christianity, the Catholic Church, all of that, it's always been rooted in compassion and empathy and love for one another. But part of the problem is humans are still humans. Whether they're in the church or not, they're going to be people who make mistakes. And I think that there is such a thing as suicidal. Like, I love that Gad says that, because it's so It's so, like, nail-head. It does not get more complicated than that. We have weaponized compassion. We have weaponized empathy. And how dare you say anything that isn't compassionate or empathetic? The same comments I get by all of the trolls is, how dare you tell me that I cannot die? My response is quite harsh. I'm not going to lie to you. You can go die, but you don't get to do it with my taxpayer dollar in my healthcare system.
Quite. So looking forward then.
Yeah.
What can we expect next? Have you been part of the fight back? We're here in London. We've been at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. We've mentioned Jordan Peterson a few times in this conversation. The Alliance was founded by him. Are you speaking to those who are fighting the bill? I note that I talked about the popularity in the British public, 75%, but even within Parliament, the majority of Labour, the majority of Reform, although they only have 5 MPs, voted in favour of the bill. It's, I think, only the Conservatives who had a majority against the bill. What can we expect going forward? Are you hopeful that it can be turned around, or does it sort of seem inevitable? I mean, from my point of view, it sort of seems inevitable.
No, it's not inevitable. It's not. I'll tell you why. I'll read exactly why. So here's the thing. The bill passed by just 55 votes. That's it, at the second reading. And yet, according to Maddox, approximately 140 MPs are considering changing their votes at the third reading. This is what we're being told, which then tells me that people are questioning this because it's being forced through at all cost. When they bring up why this shouldn't be happening, the reality is whether they want to hear evidence from us or not, and which they won't, which, by the way, I'm here. There's people here. Alex Schattenberg is here. Alicia Duncan is coming over. All of us have tried to speak in Parliament. They refuse. They will not have us. They will not hear us. We're too convincing. And so the beautiful thing, though, about the internet that they don't love is that they can hear these stories wherever they want. These MPs, if you vote for this is what you're voting for. I promise you, there will be one that slips through. And that one will be on you. That one death, whether it's a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, an aunt, an uncle, is a community member. And that one death will impact every single person around them. So that's not just them. That's their children. That's their loved ones. That's their churches. That's their schools. You think that you'll get away with this long term? The reality is, governments make mistakes left, right, and center. They do. They do it from an educated standpoint. But people will weaponize this the same way almost every other nation has weaponized this. And it's because it's much easier to get rid of the sick and the dying and the liabilities and the problems and the burdens on the cost of our healthcare systems than it is to sit down and say, our system is broken. It needs a revamp. Our governments have to actually start putting people first and not other people like our undocumented immigrants who bog down the system and giving them thousands of dollars like Canada has just stated this week. If you are from Gaza, you can apply and every adult will get $3,500 and every minor will get $1,500. Okay? So to think that the governments are always going to make the right decision is one thing. But the harsh reality is for these MPs who vote for this, like the MPs that voted for it in Canada, you are compliant in the death of people who do not qualify to die. And they may be terminally ill at the beginning. But if you think only a few years after that they're not going to be people who were just healthy, people who learned how to gain the system, you're out of your mind. And that blood and that death, just like those that voted for Iraq war and Afghan war and to send troops into what they knew would be just a slaughter, is on you. I don't have to lose sleep at night at it. I know that what I'm doing with my time and my voice and my energy and everything that I put forward every day, and there's people in these MAID groups like Alicia Duncan and Joel Zivit and Christopher Lyon, all of these people, Alex Schattenberg, these people in Scotland that I met with, these CEOs of Care Not Killing, all of them have spent their 20 plus years fighting up against what I believe is the dark, is evil, is in the truest form malevolence. I'm not the one that will lose sleep at night. I'm not the one that will hear about the case of the 20-year-old who had depression and decided they could gain the system and now they died by suicide under your watch. Not me. No, no, no.
And what about for Canada? Is there any, there's elections coming up. Pierre Poilievre is he favorite to win?
I mean, he's our only hope.
And is there hope that it can be turned around? I mean, look, if we talked about, I mentioned abortion earlier. Basically, even though there's a pro-life movement in Britain, people are so supportive. It's kind of politically unthinkable that abortion would be criminalized again. Is it, after a certain amount of time, these things are there. It's kind of weird to turn around on them. Do you think it's possible in Canada, or is it over?
I'm an incurable optimist. I'm serious. I often don't sound like it. I'm very aware. But I'm in the subjects because I have to be an incurable optimist to be able to handle the constant death and destruction of young people's minds in society. You have to be different to step into this arena and not allow it to make you batshit crazy. But I think we have a chance. I mean, we were supposed to have the mentally ill and the mature minors go into 2024, and we made so much noise it got tabled. So that tells me that we've done something. The Jordan Peterson clip got a bill flipped in Delaware.
Did it?
Yeah, it got stopped on the floor. It flipped back, but they did question him on the floor about the mechanism of death, which was wild and insane to me. So when people say that...
When you say, what are you referring to specifically?
There was a Democrat that put a bill forward to bring medical assistance in dying into Delaware. And then he sponsored the bill. They questioned him on the floor about the mechanism of death due to our discussion with Jordan about the how people die with the drugs.
So they saw your interview with Jordan?
Presumably, that's what we are at the understanding of right now. This is what was vocalized to us. And he flipped his own bill that he sponsored on the floor, which is insane. You sponsored the bill through. It ended up getting, lobbied, and I'm sure they paid him or did something else to sell his soul, but he flipped it back. But the point is when people act as if it can't happen, it's because they're just not being loud enough. I will always say, though, I'm in this lovely MAID group, and these are brilliant intellectuals, just absolutely
anti-MAID group, I hope.
Yes, very anti-MAID. We call it my MAID group, my anti-MAID group. These are I call them my merry band of weirdos who spend their nights reading on, assisted suicide and how to murder and like correlations. And these people just throw their entire selves into this. And this is just something I do. It's not all that I do. And so, a few of them are like, Kelsi, we just really don't like the way you speak about the subject. We don't like that it's so aggressive and you swear and the tendencies they really upset us, and I politely fuck off. I have issues when you refuse to call people what they are. They're murdering innocent people who do not qualify while using your taxpayer dollar to do it.
Have they threatened you with any of these people you accuse of killing and murdering? Have they threatened you of legal action?
What? How can you legally threaten somebody when everything's public domain?
But they presumably don't call it murder. So they...
So?
Well,
but I'm not accusing...
I don't know what Canadian libel laws are.
But you're killing people, though, right?
Right, yeah.
Right, so you're ending someone's life, though, right?
Well, if assisted dying, they would probably say...
But they're euthanizing, though.
Right.
They're euthanizing you. They're putting an IV in and euthanizing you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you can say you don't have to like the terminology. Let's call, we're euthanizing. You know what? They're euthanizers. They're euthanized providers. Okay. You're still killing someone, though, no?
Mm.
You're still turning their lights off. When you finish putting the syringe in, are they awake? Do they get up and leave? Is that not killing?
Mm. Well, you've painted a bleak picture, frankly.
But it doesn't have to be bleak.
Well, well, that's why I said we've ended on a somewhat optimistic, or at least you're the optimistic person.
Yeah.
What sort of any last words on this for the people, the English people listening? I guess it's happening across the West. So, what can you, encouragement or wisdom can you lay out for those who have heard what you've just heard and will have been as shaken as I am.
It's really simple. People underestimate what they can do in a year and overestimate what they can do in 10. And people underestimate how much one person can change the world. That's just the hard truth. You have a real opportunity. You guys have a real, once the law is in, it is so hard to wheel it back in, but it's doable. It's possible. You have to make noise and be loud and bring in lawyers and legislators, and you really have to make a case for why this is a problem, and the fact that Canada hasn't just immediately hit the pause button and said, wow, we have to, but they keep pushing forward because dying with dignity is worth $8 million and also gets paid by the Liberal government, and Bell and Telus and Rogers and all of the actual Catholic churches, and the synagogues donate to them, and the very, very, very public 2023 Dying with Dignity donation report that is on their website for everyone to go find, including the children's book you can download for your child to explain why MAID is so great. So feel free to have a peruse. But we, as a people, the government works for us. We have forgotten that. We have forgotten that these are appointed individuals, right? We have forgotten that they have pressure points, just like any other human. So start pushing, start calling your MP and saying, I'm never voting for you again if you push this bill forward. Because if you think for a single second that it will stay with the terminally ill, take a look at history, take a look at every example across the globe. We are a beautiful example of how to do it wrong. But most importantly, if you think it's not going to reach out and touch you at some point, your loved one, your family member, or otherwise, you're out of your mind. And if again you say, I still think it should be allowed, I would like you to take a look at the clip on Jordan Peterson about how somebody dies with these drugs and how much pain, and I mean excruciating pain, they will then go through. So if you're good with that, with sending grandma to walk into a facility, to put 2 IVs in her, to then, because it's assisted, so to give grandma a drink, to then have it burn her esophagus and hope that she dies in some capacity where it's very quick. You have another thing coming, but most importantly, in my coaching practice, a friend of mine taught me this is the best example I can give. Awareness is the finish line. I've now made you aware. You have a moral obligation to do something about it. So the listeners, you've now heard it. Yeah. You're obligated to make a phone call for or against it. But you can no longer sit with your head in the sand and say, I was unaware this was happening. You've been made aware.
Yeah. Kelsi Sheren, where can listeners find you?
I would recommend Spotify before YouTube goes away, because that's about to. It's on the Kelsi Sheren Perspective. We do a whole series on MAID where we talk to all of the lawyers and doctors and survivors and family members and victims of the Eugenics program in Canada, as well as you can find me on all social media platforms, just Kelsi_Sheren, or on my website at kelsisheren.com.
Kelsi, I would say a pleasure.
It's never fun, I know.
You are a wonderful company, but I'm not sure the conversation was a pleasure. It was very disturbing. But that's not to say that you're not brilliant. So thank you so much. And you're obviously a fearless woman who is pursuing the truth, and I can see justice burns within you.
Thank you.
And so I wish you all the well as you continue.
Thank you for the hard conversation. I know it's uncomfortable, but I'm just grateful for the opportunity to have it. So thank you.
Thank you for watching The Winston Marshall Show with Kelsi Sheren. If you want to support the show, remember all you have to do is press subscribe. And if you want exclusive content, head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk. You also get ad-free viewing if you head over there. But until next time, be well.